If I interject at this stage, and you did say in your questions, if people are listening today, what can they do? And I gave that a lot of thought, because as I've explained to you, and I want to explain to the viewers, the listeners, that I don't take money. I've had money offered to me and I've politely declined. I've never spent money on advertising, because I decided that early on, because anything to do with receiving money for child abuse, it just didn't sit right with my conscience. So I set up those boundaries for myself very early on. But I was thinking, what can people do? Well, number one, start up a conversation, because I don't think people are going to respond, as you said, with a secret camera. Well, you could put me in a room, no one's going to talk. They know that I'm not the one to keep their secrets. So
I would suggest you play that role. You need somebody who is a friend of theirs, sitting in a pub somewhere, or sitting, having a, and basically like laying out a bit of like, oh yeah, this is what I like to do on a weekend. How about you?
Yeah,
I probably couldn't do it either. I'm not very subtle.
Yeah, but people know that I'm not going to protect them or keep their secrets. So I make myself very public. But there are two things people can do. Start up a conversation, because there's nothing illegal about that, nothing immoral. Start up a conversation. Now, if you're living in a small town particularly, or a small community, start talking about the subject. Weave it into the weather and the whatever else you talk about, because that will make pedophiles and predators very uncomfortable. They rely on their activities being kept secret, and they rely on a group of people who may or may not be directly implicated on preserving those secrets. So start talking about it. Make them uncomfortable. If they're sitting in a social setting, make them so uncomfortable that they can't talk about anything to do with children, because you're opening up a conversation. Most people don't talk about this subject, and who can blame them? Why would you want to?
Yeah, exactly.
And the sad fact is, and this, I keep seeing this over and over again on this journey, is people don't understand the legislation. They don't understand what happens until it happens to their child, or a child they love, a child whom they're close to. And then when it happens, it's devastating. And then they get put through the system, and the system doesn't always look after them. I've had some dreadful experiences relayed to me, some examples of how poorly they were treated by the judicial system. But again, in fairness, the procedures and protocols need to be fine-tuned, perhaps, so that they can't be circumvented. Here's an example. Now, I wasn't there, but during a training day at a local Catholic school, not where I live, but close by, there was a mandatory report training day, a professional training day, and the person who was conducting the training day was relaying to them, this is what you do. And as I stated before, in an educational setting, you take it straight to the principal. And someone at the training day put their hand up to ask a question and said, well, what if it involves the principal? And the person who was conducting that training didn't answer.
Wow. Okay. Well, that says a lot. That says everything, doesn't it? I mean, yeah.
Even though I didn't witness that, the person who relayed it to me was at that training day. They were at the training day. They saw that. They saw the person say, put their hand up and say, well, what do you do if it involves the principal? And answer came there, none. Now, what do you do in that situation? That is not acceptable.
No, it isn't at all.
Not acceptable on any level. Unethical, unprofessional, illegal, and it's certainly not providing a voice for the child.
Certainly isn't.
Because let me come back. I know of one example. I live, and this is public knowledge, you can go and look this one up. Leeton High School, where is a government school, a local government school here. A former principal is now a convicted pedophile. Convicted.
Yeah.
A student from elsewhere, when he was an assistant principal, came forward many years later, made an historic account, and the former principal pled guilty. He is now a convicted pedophile. So don't think principals, don't think, when someone at the top is involved, then yes, how can you make a mandatory report?
Yeah. And wouldn't you just go to the education department? You'd have to skip the school and go straight up.
Well, so basically, this is when we talk about culture, and if there is a culture in the workplace, And you can't blame people for not coming forward, because people go to work, they're busy, they've got families and lives and mortgages to pay. They get caught up in trying to maintain their own life. And when something this huge comes along, it can be very difficult to know what to do. Now, I have a skill set, given my professional history and my current academic qualifications. I've been given a skill set that allows me to do this, but not everybody has that. I mean, all my academic training, it doesn't make me better than anyone, but it has provided me with the skills for this journey. If I hadn't been a police officer, if I hadn't undertaken all my academic training, I would not be having this conversation with you, because I wouldn't have had a
Well, let me ask you the question then. We've already covered people, what people listening today, if they've had child abuse happen, what to do about that. Now, I'll give you another scenario, which is my scenario, which is I often receive sensitive information in my role as an editor. Who would you recommend I send this documentation on to if it does involve child abuse? Where do I send information? I'm not involved. I'm not a teacher. I'm not in any organisation. I'm a media identity, and it's not something I'm going to run with. But I think I need to share this information. Do I just go straight to the police, which is probably what I think I should do?
Well, that would ideally, yes, but just remember that because I too am contacted by people from all over the world at various times, anywhere I could be contacted. So I don't know the legislation for every single place that a person is residing in, but I do know that in Australia, the offence will be investigated where it happened. So taking that into account, you could report it to the local police and ask them to follow through, or you could report it to the police if you know the location. Report it to the police at that location and say, I have this information and I just want to forward it to you. Now, twofold there, they may already have intel. If you could name the person of interest or the victim, they may already have intel, and they may be able to put that your information with other information to give them a better picture of what's happening. You may even be helping them. Number two, it may just go to the police and it may just be left there unattended if there's nothing to work with. It depends on how much information you're given. Depends what's been disclosed, and depends on how much information you have on hand. But essentially, that's what you could do. If you're not sure what to do, you could speak to someone like myself, and I could provide, not legal advice, but I could provide support on administrative systems. It depends on what the information is.
Yes, it does. Okay. But basically, if they don't want to go straight to the police, they could just shoot a private message to you via the Child Abuse Whistleblowers Facebook page, and you'll give them some direction.
Absolutely. I'm not advertising, but it's an option. There are many child abuse.
Oh, it's not advertising, believe me. It's basically people just need that first. We just need to be pointed. I have had a situation which happened to me when I was quite young, and I didn't know what to do at the time. I did something about it 10 years later, when I discovered this particular person was working at a school that my daughter was about to attend, and I didn't want him anywhere near my daughter. I couldn't believe he was still in. I had thought the police had taken care of him 10 years previously, and to discover that my daughter was about to go to school with this pedophile who was in the Lutheran system, not Catholic, but Lutheran. And I remember when I went to the school to do the orientation, I pulled the head guy aside and we had a chat, and he was no longer a teacher at that school within like 2 days. I've never seen anything happen so quickly in my life. So I don't know. I think the Lutherans are onto it a bit more than the Catholics, because I knew what. The reason it happened so quickly too was, I'll give you the scenario and you can tell me. I was flatting 10 years previous. I was in a share accommodation setting, and actually it might have been longer than 10 years, because it was starting grade 4. That's right, yeah. So I was in a share flat and I was in my early 20s, and I just moved into this place, And I had a girlfriend that worked at the local photo shop. Do you remember when you used to take your film in and they give you the photos back? How old is that? She was one of those girls. She used to check, fix all the photos and adjust things and then print them out. And it would be like, come back in an hour, you know, and your photos will be ready, that type of thing. And it was at one of the major shopping centres in Brisbane. Anyway, she and I have been good friends for ages, but she hadn't made it up to my new place. So I invited her up one night for dinner, and I was sharing at the time with 2 guys and another girl, and she hadn't met all of them, but she met the one guy on the night, and her reaction to him, like when I was introducing them, she just went deathly white, refused to touch him, shake his hand, and basically said, oh, I'm not feeling well. Could you walk me to my car? I've got to go. And I'm thinking, well, this is a bit odd. Anyway, I get to the car and she tells me that he'd come in with photos of our children. And it handed the roll over and expected them just to be processed and handed back. But she'd noticed they used to just do that, put it in the machine, it would be processed in the bag and handed back to the client. But sometimes if there was something wrong with the film, she would actually have to look at the photos and do reprints. And that's something happened to his film. So it got jammed in the machine or something. So she had to do that. And when she actually started looking at the photos, she realised what they were of, and she rang the police. So in her official capacity as a photo lady, they actually had a process in place. This is quite a few years ago now, of course. And the police came in that hour, and they instructed her, they were plain clothes, and they instructed her to just hand them back when he came in, so that he had, I don't know, there was something like he was receiving them. So there was actually a crime, you know, him just signing off and paying for them as well, even though it was his film that he put in. And she had to fill out forms, and she didn't know what had happened. Apparently this was a regular occurrence back in the 90s, unfortunately. And so she didn't know what happened with him in particular, but it had only happened, I think, about 6 weeks earlier that she met him again in my house. The guy that had put the photos in was my flatmate, who I just moved in to the share. I know, how about that? And so anyway, so I moved out for that weekend, I think, straight out.
As you do.
There's no way on earth I was going to be living with a pedophile. And I told the other people in the share what had happened, and they were both, the guy was his good friend, so he basically went, well, I'm not moving out. I don't believe your friend. And I said, so he wasn't contacted by police 6 weeks ago or anything? And he just shut up and didn't say anything. And the other girl looked at me, and she moved out, I think, about a few weeks after me. She had to find a place to go to. So, and I thought the police had it in hand, so I went on with my life. Anyway, about, 10 years later, I'm at the school that my daughter's about to enroll at, and I'm flicking through the prospectus, and he's there on the prospectus as one of the teachers. And I'm just thinking, oh my, my husband and I remember we had a huge argument that night, because I just said, there's no way I'm sending my kid to a school that has I know there's a pedophile, you know, teaching at. And he said, oh, you know, what, you know, maybe it wasn't him. And I said, I'm sorry, but I believe my friend. She saw photos of him doing stuff with children. I'm not sorry, that's not, you know. Anyway, so I'm thinking, how the hell did he get off that for a start? You know, if there's actual physical evidence. And then I'm thinking, I'm not, you know, I want my kid to go to this school, but this is ridiculous, you know. So that's when on orientation day I did my thing, and, you know.
Now, as you've been speaking, I took on that entire example. Now, in the school system, and even though I take on private tutors, I'm trying to rebuild my life by tutoring privately, I like to show parents and guardians my check, my working with children check. Now, just remember that every person who works in the education system has to supply their name for a criminal check. Now, yeah. I'd been a police officer, so I've been fingerprinted and all of that, and you can't be a police officer with a criminal record of any type. And so obviously nothing came up with me. But keep this in mind. The only time that criminal check will show anything is if they've been convicted.
Mm.
So if they've not been convicted of anything, they could be, and I've made some notes here. I was listening to you and I thought I'll write this down so I don't lose focus. But the piece of paper that I can show parents and guardians, I had to pay $80 for it. It's only valid for 3 or 4 years, I think, 4 or 5 years, I don't know, a few years. And basically I show it to them and I say, how this protects your child, I don't know. Because let's use that as an example. Let's say a pedophile, because a pedophile and a predator, they're a bit different. On this journey, I learned that, okay, there is a difference. And I learned this from police files, from some police investigative research papers. A pedophile is somebody who will go out of their way to put themselves where children are at. They'll go and do a teaching degree. They'll drive the school bus. They'll get a job at a school, coach sport, become a pediatrician, you know, anything where there are children. It doesn't matter how much effort has to go into getting there, or whether it's a simple job or a highly academic position, they will they will spare no effort to make sure they are where children are. A predator doesn't act on it, but if the opportunity presents, they'll act on it. They don't go looking for it. So basically, they may not be an active pedophile, but they're in a situation with a child and it's private and they think, gee, this is a good opportunity, that they will seize the opportunity. So whenever I'm writing or speaking, I always say pedophiles and predators, because there is a distinct difference. I mean, both of them have an issue, obviously. But getting back to the criminal check, so if a person has no criminal record, but they are a practicing pedophile, what does that be? So that piece of paper is useless.
Yeah.
You might as well put it on the toilet roll and use it as toilet paper. It's useless. Useless.
Is the new blue card any better? You know, my daughter's just started midwifery and she's just received her blue card. And she had to jump for a few hoops to get that, and the forms were, you know, quite detailed. But it was easy for her to fill out, but I can't imagine it would be easy for somebody trying to get a blue card if they've got a history like this guy has, you know.
Exactly. Look, I know one example where the person has been teaching for entire life and there are multiple victims, and yet because they've never been convicted, then there's nothing on the system. So if people think that by sending their child to a school where everyone's vetted, well, don't think that that's any way to protect your child. They have to be convicted. They have to have come to police attention. And as I've said before, sometimes, not always, but sometimes an investigation can simply be the information being placed to the person of interest, the POI, and did you do this? And they say no, and that's it. That's the investigation. Not always, but in some instances, it's been brought to my attention that that is all that happens.
Yeah, I just don't understand. I was so peeved that he got away with teaching for a further 10 years or however long it was. I sent an email to a communication to the education department and basically said, I do not understand. Where has this guy been working for the last 10 years? Have there been incidents? You know?
What was your response from the Department of Education?
I didn't get any response. I sent multiple emails and it was like I rang up to find out what was going on and they said, oh, we haven't received your things. And I went, oh, really? I just basically just shook my head. I suppose I was happy that, you know, he wasn't at the school, and it was an interesting introduction to the school. My husband was an old scholar there, and so this was actually the third generation of his family going. And so I think they took it a little more seriously because of that as well, the school.
You just had a decent principal.
Yeah, and he was a great guy. They seem to, I don't know, like Lutheran seem, like I grew up Catholic, so I know where you're coming from. And I renounced Catholicism about 19 because I realised it really doesn't do any favours for women, let's face it. And with but a lot of most religions don't, to be honest. But I found I kind of came back into the fold when the kids started school, because especially in the Lutheran world, they really seem to take the development of the child and the child health and their well-being to heart. So, and that's the only way that you. There was no way my kids were going to a Catholic school.
No,
I mean,
it's very opportune that you had that information on hand and that you recognised him and that action was taken. But I really want the public to know that if a practicing, let's call it practicing pedophile, has not been brought to police attention, then your child could be in the company of a pedophile every day. Every day you send them to school.
Listen, so, if they hadn't, to be honest, you don't know me that well now, but
I'm sorry, you've triggered a memory. Can I just mention, now this was something I didn't know. Now I made the mandatory reports, did everything, life destroyed. I was out there struggling to try and get work, and I must have had a communication with the Department of Education at some stage. And apparently, after I made the Child Abuse Whistleblowing community page on Facebook, I had a black mark against my name.
Because you did that.
So the system actually turned me into the bad guy, and I didn't know that. That took quite some time for that information to come through, and it was just a chance phone conversation. So first person wasn't administrative, wasn't correspondence.
Well, you know why that is though, Amanda? It's because you're looking at the Catholic Church as a religion, and it's not, it's business.
But while it's in my mind, you've triggered my memory. I know why it happened, but I want people to know this is how poorly the situation has been set up, the administrative position, because I'm doing the right thing. Not only was the system circumvented, and then they turned me into the bad guy. That's because they were terrified that their secrets were going to come out. But getting back to the Department of Education, at the moment, I've got the Police Commissioner, the Department of Education and Fairfax Media. I'm trying to get a response from each of them for what has been done to me. But the Department of Education is being decidedly hesitant. I had an automated response. It just doesn't even have a name. It just has Ministerial and Executive Services, because I'm directing my correspondence to the Secretary, Mr. Mark Scott. He's the Secretary for the Department of Education. Then you get into politics. So he's the last step before you get to the political arena. So I follow procedures. But there seems to be a hesitancy to actually address what I'm trying to do and say, and I've done everything correctly. Also, when you said they claimed, the Department of Education claimed they didn't get your emails, very early on in this journey, I decided to write a recount. First of all, it was just going to be a legal timeline of what had happened, but it morphed into a book. It was just so complex and everything overlapped. I cannot tell it chronologically. It's impossible. Sometimes I had 3 and 4 agencies happening at once. So I was just trying to sort things out. So I made copies and I contacted some select people and I sent them a hard copy. And the only one that didn't arrive to a high profile person. But every other hard copy was received. And that's still a mystery to this day as to why the other copy didn't get to its intended destination. And after that, I sent everything by registered mail. It costs a bit, but everything goes by registered mail. So I know it's received. It has to be signed for, and I've had no problem. And matter of fact, I think because I've persisted and I've persisted properly, they have to acknowledge what I'm doing, even if they're not addressing it just yet. And we'll get back to it, but you said, what can people do? Well, there is something else they can do, but we'll talk about that further on. And that's got to do with my correspondence and items that I'm prepared to publish.
So
shall I discuss it?
Sorry.
Shall I discuss it now while I'm thinking about it? Because number one is have the conversation. Be vocal in wherever you are. Be vocal. Let people know that you've come to realise that child abuse is a real problem, and it's important that people don't let it happen first and then suddenly get launched into legal and administrative protocols that can be quite overwhelming. But number two, I'm deciding on whether I'm seizing this opportunity with you and your viewers. I will consider publishing a brief letter, and all people will have to do is print that off and send it to either the New South Wales Police Commissioner, the Department of Education, and or Fairfax Media. People could do that. Send a letter to these people. I have friends who work in government, and it was explained to me that when people ring a government agency, even if they just ring, everything is logged and the postcode is logged. So if you don't think you can make a difference, you can.
Mm.
So let's just say we get 1,000 people sending a letter into the police commissioner. They have to address that, or 1,000 letters going into the Department of Education to Mr. Scott.
Mm.
They have to address it. Fairfax Media. Even today, we discussed at the beginning, you had written former teacher. Well, I'm not a former teacher, and that was listed in an online news article. So send a letter to the Fairfax Media and say, why are you calling this woman XYZ? Why are you stating this in a false and misleading article? Because they have protocols that they have to put into play when this happens.
Mm.
And apparently legislation is, you have to act within 6 weeks. Well, please forgive me for not taking 6 weeks, because I've had a huge, I can't tell you how big this is. I had no idea this would morph into what it has. I had no idea I would become a child abuse whistleblower. So legislation is very tight. It has tight boundaries in some instances, and in other instances, it's not even there. There's nothing.
Yeah.
Whistleblower, no legislation, so I'm running on that. That doesn't mean I do anything I want. I still tread very carefully, but it's in our favour. So if you want to stand with me, because we don't have legislation. And to put it simply, when I was at the police academy, they explained, okay, you have a firearm, you have lethal protection on your hip, and the reason you have it is because the people want you to have it, and that is steeped in common law. So should people want to do something, number one, start a conversation. Number two, print off something, or even if you just print off anything I've already published. But I was thinking along the lines of, because this isn't live, I will publish something specific, and then they can mail it to those 3 agencies. Yeah. And that will help. And then we together, I've done all the hard yards, stand with me, and then we can nudge things along and agitate for proper legislation. So that mandatory reporters and child abuse whistleblowers are not victimised. How can I possibly protect a child when I'm not protected? It doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't. So what do you think about like television presenters like Senator Hinch, who has a role in exposing child abuse? Or do you think that exploitative nature of television can damage a future investigation, or the people involved with it, I suppose, as well? That exposure.
I don't want to answer that with opinion. I want to answer that with a first-person interaction with Senator Hinch's office. Now, before he was elected, I had a couple of emails, communications with him, and so he was aware of who I was and what I was doing. Then he became elected, and I was in his office, and I think 2 or 3 times I was speaking to his staff, and I said, well, it's a long, complicated process, but are you familiar with legislation? So if I cite legislation, that will kind of encapsulate what I'm trying to, and they said, no, we haven't. And I said, well, I'm not prepared to sit here and talk to you for 20 minutes, half an hour, and then you, number one, don't even know the legislation, and number two, no offence to you, but you may not repeat properly what I'm explaining to you. So I didn't actually get to Senator Hinch, but I've had some feedback to suggest that all is not what it seems there. That's all I'm going to say.
Okay.
Just know that I'm well acquainted with a lot of the well-known names. I have information comes to me from a variety of directions, nationally and internationally. So all would not be as it seems there, because you would think logically that Senator Hinch would want to be in touch with a child abuse whistleblower. you would think that he would want to have at least one face-to-face conversation with me just to see what I'm doing, even if he doesn't act on it. But
exactly.
I couldn't even get that, and his staff aren't trained with regard to legislation. So how could I properly expect them to relay to him? And I learned on this journey not to waste your effort speaking to people if you don't feel it's going to be addressed properly, or if it's going to be relayed properly when it's not correspondence on paper. And I've learned a lot, and that was one example. So when you ask about Senator Hinch, television presenters, well, just remember television presenters, per se, they have an agenda, and that's usually their producer and director. And basically, child abuse seems to be today's headlines, tomorrow's fish and chip paper. And in saying, I'm not being harsh to all the journalists out there, they do a really good job. And the investigative journalists often dig up and persist where the police can't or won't, and the good guys, the good people really do make an effort and make a difference. But at the end of the day, it appears to me that anything to do with child abuse is very seldom, and it should be front and centre. If children aren't our most important factor of society, because they're our future, we don't protect them, we don't have a future, basically. Yep. So television, I feel, has an agenda, because there's a lot of money tied up in television. And it appears to me that when you have the money and you're the director or the producer, for whatever reason, they have their own method of what they will include. And when they do include it, it's very, very specific. And I'm going to give you another example. I was busy researching one day, and I asked two people who had been following me on the Child Abuse Whistleblowers page. I said, I didn't speak to them together. I spoke to them separately. I said, would you do me a favour? Would you go out and investigate and find me examples of where children have died in care? You know, these children with 100 fax notifications, and then suddenly they're dead. No one's removed them from the danger. And it was as sad as this is. They both came back with a lot of examples, and they only overlapped once. So they provided me, I don't have the document in front of me. I have about 30 examples.
Wow. Children
dying at school or in care or under mysterious circumstances. And a lot of them had multiple docs notifications and were known to police, all of that. But these two people went off independently. I didn't have a conversation with both of them. I just contacted them separately and said, would you mind just going out and researching that for me? And they came back with separate items. They only included one item that overlapped, that they both reported.
That says a lot, doesn't it? And they are in the same area?
No. And they're both from Australia. So basically they had the same access to the same internet. But basically these were all publicly published examples in the media, mainstream media, and they're all dead. So it appears to me that the only time the media really likes to report on them is when they're deceased.
Yeah. I've noticed that as well. So, look, since we're talking about death, the next question is a perfect lead-in. And we're now going to get into questions on the support system around you. I believe you have an insurance policy in place that ensures that should any harm come to you, documentation will be published to the World Wide Web. What prompted you to set up this safeguard? Were you threatened in some way?
No, it's not so much I was threatened. It just happened. I was on a particular website chatting to people, and it was just a chance meeting with a person who is a computer scientist, a computer technician. People who write algorithms and write code and who know the intricate workings of computers. And we just came to an arrangement where there is an underground following who have an archive of documents for me. They hold them in trust, and they're not just my documents. One example is a person I was speaking to a member of the public, and then they sent me a police statement and said, Amanda, I'm about to enter witness protection tomorrow with my child. I'd just like you to have my police statement. So statements like that.
Mm-hmm.
There's an archive of documentation, all the important stuff. And it was just agreed that should any harm come to me, that will be uploaded to the World Wide Web.
Right.
And
I think that's a good idea. I mean, you never know who you're going to be crossing in this industry, do you?
It's just something that happened. I didn't search for it. I don't think they were searching for it either. But it just, we agreed on that. And I was very strict about anything. This was the one proviso. I said, if you find anything, if you bring anything to me or anything to the table, it must be obtained legally, lawfully, because if you don't,
Yeah.
what can we do with it? We can't do anything with it. And so that was my only proviso,
Mm-hmm.
was that everything be done logically, lawfully, legally, ethically. And so, of course, every now and then, information comes and it is directed to the police or the appropriate authority, and we have an archive.
Excellent. Well, so this is what I want to talk about now, this amazing underground support system you have in place. Now, I know it's primarily a group of computer scientists and computer technicians that want to see your agenda progress like the rest of us. Would you share a little about their activities that assist you? What else do they do apart from the archiving?
Well, I don't ask questions, and they do what they do, and they're very clever. So basically, I don't interfere with what they do, but given that they've got computer skills, sometimes they chance upon information, but it always goes directly to the appropriate authorities. Because that was my one proviso. Now, we don't know how many's in the underground, but it is global, and we suspect that could be 100,000, could be 1 million by now. Because it's underground, we obviously don't have statistics, but it is worldwide, and some hints that have come along, just some chance meetings with people, it would indicate that it is definitely global, and a lot of people know who I am and what I'm doing, and I am very, very grateful, because knowing they have my back, it's given me a sense of security that I wouldn't normally have. And let's just mention that when I blew the whistle and went public, no police came near me. Even though the Catholic Schools Office took legal action, there was just a couple of letters telling me to take it down, but Facebook had taken down 2 posts, and I rewrote them and put them back up again, just a little bit different. And no one's been near me. No police have come near me to arrest me or talk to me or anything. Although my computer does play up from time to time, and it makes you wonder just how monitored I am.
I think we're all monitored. So do you need any volunteers? And if so, where can people get involved? Or what, apart from sending the letter that you're going to put up on the Facebook page, you actually said you're going to put 3 different types of letters, one to the police, one to education, and one to a government representative?
No, Fairfax Media. The three that I've recently communicated with, and I was just giving them some latitude, giving them some time to respond, because I've conducted myself properly this entire journey. Basically, if they haven't responded by the time this podcast, whether it's one or a series, by this time it goes to air, I will publish something that they can send off to any or all 3 of them. Basically, that's what they can do, because I noticed because I'm researching legislation a lot, I have legislation sent to me, and sometimes I stumble upon things when I'm looking at certain acts, and it would appear that our ability to speak freely is being eroded. I'm not sure how much, and I don't like commenting too much, but it does appear, and it's only because I'm looking at legislation that I've stumbled upon. So basically, I'd rather not have rallies. I'd rather not meet in public. I would rather people start up a communication, have conversations, talk to people, because that can be far more powerful.
Yes.
Because if you have a rally, for instance, and I think somewhere in America or somewhere, some child abuse people were going to rally and the police shut them down. The government won't let them. So let's not do that. Let's look at other tactics. Let's think divergently. Let's problem solve. Okay, so Correspondence. Well, the government like correspondence. That's how they like to deal with their business. So send them letters. Let's get 10,000 letters sent to the police commissioner. Let's get 10,000 sent to the Department of Education, 10,000 sent to Fairfax Media and say, please address this. Just say that. Please address this. Please don't ignore it. This is about my children. This is about the children next door. This is about the children down the road. Because if we allow ourselves to let a global community of wounded children grow up, wounded, thinking no one cared and no one was interested, what sort of a life are you going to have as an elderly person?
Yeah. Exactly.
When the children who have grown up wounded, they're walking wounded, they're everywhere. They need to know we at least tried. Okay, we weren't there when it was happening. And I try not to think about that too much now because I find it draining and upsetting. But I did there at one stage think, gosh, not one person was there for them. The least we can do is be there now, at least make an effort. So instead of volunteering, and this doesn't involve any money, so you don't have to make donations. Let's be clever about this. Conversations, start up a conversation and send some letters, and I will help that process because I've done the hard yards.
Yeah, thanks for that.
And so let's be a voice together.
Yes, good idea.
Send the correspondence to these people, and I'll give instructions. Like to send it by registered mail is far more important. It will get there. It will be registered, and that's how common law comes about. It's what the people want. Do the people want their children protected? Then let's do this together. And let's not rally so the police have to come in and shut us down. Let's not do any of that. Let's think divergently. We will problem solve and do this properly.
Yeah,
in a manner that is lawful and non-threatening, and we'll get a result eventually.
Can we have a quick chat? I've got a few questions here on what I call the MAPS agenda, which is, for those that don't know, that's short for Minor Attracted Persons. So recently, and then we might have a chat about Pizzagate after, of course, which has been debunked overseas, but I don't know if it's going to come back to bite a few people through that debunking process. So recently I've noticed two disturbing agendas online, which is where I live. I spend a lot of my life. The first one is MAPS, which is short for Minor Attracted Persons, a rename for pedophiles, basically. Also, there was a TEDx talk given by Mirjam Heiner, a medical student, on why our perception of pedophilia has to change. And I'll put the link into the blog so that people can go and check that out. Unfortunately, it's not the original TEDx because it was up for about a day before people just exploded. And the one that I've got the link to it's still the whole TEDx thing, but it's got a gentleman talking on either side of it. What do you think about the way pedophilia is trying to mainstream itself as a normal sexual urge and type?
Okay, there is an agenda, I will say that, and it is purposeful. But I want to say this before I comment any further. If you're a parent or an auntie, a sister, uncle, if you have a child in your life that you love and care for, picture them with an adult having sex and ask yourself, is that normal? And I know that is revolting to most people.
Of course it is.
But yeah. Picture it and then ask yourself, is that normal? No, it isn't. I'm going to give you a real example now. I needed to talk to a professional, so I asked my doctor for the name of a counsellor. I just needed a safe place at one particular point in my journey about 12 months ago. I just needed to be able to sit down and talk openly, freely, just to unload. Mm-hmm. And if I mentioned names and dates and locations, it was in a safe place. And I walked in, and young girl, and I'm making no judgment on her, she was following her training. I saw her write down PTSD. And I looked at it and I said, post? I said, this will never be over for me. This has destroyed my life. This has impacted, it's changed my life. And D for disorder. I thought the pedophiles and the predators were the ones with the disorder. Because I stated to her, I just need a safe place to unload. And that's immediately I was being labelled. I don't have post-traumatic stress disorder. trauma, stress, oh, truckloads every day. But post, it will never be over, and it's never over for the victims either. And that's why I loathe that label. So ask yourself, number one, think of a child you care for, think of a child you love, picture them having sex with an adult, a grown adult. And now I'm going to give you an example of something I saw when I was at the police academy, and it haunted me, and it was long before this journey opened up. I was in the library. It was a great library. It was very interesting, and I chanced upon a book. It was about detectives and their investigating procedures. Try and picture this. It was a crime scene photograph of a little boy straddled over a chair, or something was cropped. No, only had a t-shirt on and no bottoms. And he's just frozen in that position. And it stated that he died of internal injuries after being sodomised so violently that it perforated his organs, and he died in that position. So please just take a moment to absorb that. And I know it's shocking, but I want people to understand, and you don't understand this. I didn't understand it fully. And that was when I was at the police academy, long before this journey opened up for me. And I remember being absolutely gobsmacked. And that image is imprinted. And that little boy deserved a voice. And I wanted that voice. I might be late, but I'd rather be late than not make an effort. And this happens every day to children. So if you think, what does this doctor say? She says, why our perception of pedophilia has to change. Yes, it has to get stronger. It has to get more educated. We have to understand that pedophiles rely on you giving birth to children and bringing them into the world so they've got fodder.
Yeah.
I don't care who you are or what you think or what your politics are. Pedophilia is a disorder. It is a mental disease. It is not right, and they cannot be trusted in society. And if you think your child's safe, think again. And I'm not trying to frighten people, but I know how the system works. I've already discussed the fact
I think they need to be frightened, to be honest, Amanda, because it's such a, like, most normal people look at this and they don't want to know about it. They just say, don't talk to me about this. But that's the problem.
Yes.
The problem
I live in a country town. I live in a rural setting. This is a farming community. It's a small town.
I imagine it would be worse, actually, there.
Well, I can't believe what I've uncovered, truly. I can't. Some days I think, wow. But you can no longer shock me. Now, when I first started this journey, I thought, yes, I'm sure that child sexual abuse exists, even the ritual stuff, the really dark satanic stuff. I'm sure it exists, but I'm sure it's very rare. I'm sure it's difficult to locate, and even more difficult to bring to a judicial setting.
And was it?
Oh my gosh, have I been educated? It is everywhere. And don't think it's not in your town. And don't think that it can't happen to your child, even if it's at school and it's your child's best friend or a classmate. Because some of them are so bold that they actively engage in intimate behaviours in front of other students. The examples that have been given to me have been incredible. Incredible.
I remember, it's funny, I remember in, I think, year 4 for one of my kids, I was talking to a couple of the girls, and they're all year 4s at this time. And I asked where another child was, because I thought I was taking them to the park after school for a play and then dropping them home after. And one of the other girls, not my daughter, but the other girls basically said, oh, so-and-so didn't come to school today. She only got a B+ and she didn't get an A. So her mum made her sleep in the attic last night. And you hear stuff like this occasionally, you kind of go, what? What are you talking about? What do you mean makes us? She says, oh yes, if she doesn't get an A, she has to sleep up with the spiders in the attic. It's stuff like that you kind of shake your head about, and you kind of think, okay.
Okay, here's an example from many, many, many years ago, before this was even on my radar. I met, let's just say I met a woman, and she volunteered some information to me. She said she'd been groomed for a very well-known dance singing school. I won't name it, but it was a very high profile. And she said, that's all I wanted to do. I just wanted to sing and dance. And her mother remarried, took her to the doctor, and she said to the doctor, oh, I think she's been playing with sticks. You know, she's heard of it. And the doctor said, well, that might account for the physical injuries, but that doesn't explain the gonorrhea.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I have another lady that I worked with. She came around to visit me on the day off, and we were just chatting, and she, oh gosh, I've got to be really careful with this example. High profile family, professional parent, large family. I don't want to identify her in any way, but basically she said, 3 of my brothers went through me before I realised it was wrong.
Oh my gosh.
Sharon, we might edit one out. Don't put that to
take
air.
that one out.
That's another example of someone disclosing to me, and that was in my 20s.
Yeah.
And
that is so. Look, it's not the first time somebody said something similar to me. Not as in that way, but they. Yeah. I mean, there's even some politics at the moment that apparently married their brother to get them a green card or stuff, but that's a particular religion where it's allowed. I don't know why, but it is. Let's talk about Pizzagate, because, you know, as I said a little earlier, this is Pizzagate, for those that don't know, was actually a documentary that was released by Titus Frost in 2016. And the associated conspiracy theory that came with it has apparently been debunked by the mainstream news services. And in 2016, I probably went along with that. But since then, you know, I think there's a lot of allegations that were put forward in respect to John Podesta and James Alefantis and their code words and their symbols, which I think should be investigated further. To be honest, I think there's just too much kind of piling up now for it to be ignored as just something debunked and a hoax. What do you think, Amanda?
Okay, well, I have a long-running thread on a website. I'm going to direct your viewers to the website. It's called The One Truth.